This video lesson is about how to read academic journal articles. So I want to start by talking to you about the basic structure of an academic journal article. And I guess I will say first that not all academic journal articles have the exact same structure or organization. So the article that you read may look like this, or it may look a little bit different. But it's really common for academic journal articles to have some or most of these sections. So if you look on the right here, you'll see an example of an academic journal article. First up at the top, you see here the title and some information about the author. And then almost always the first thing that you'll find is the abstract. And the abstract is basically just a brief summary of this academic journal article. In one paragraph, it will tell you what this article is all about. And then the next section you'll see, it might be called the introduction, it might be called the literature review, it could have a few different names. But basically, if it's an introduction, then like the introductions for your essays, it will give you some brief background information on the subject. It might provide you with like a thesis or something like that. And especially if it's called literature review, then what they'll do is they will tell you what others have learned about their topic. What that means is before a professor or a researcher writes an academic journal article, they usually go and they read as much as they can about their topic. And they try to find out everything that other people have already learned about their topic. And they'll summarize all of that and put it into something called a literature review. So that's usually at the beginning of a paper. It's one of the first sections. The next section that you'll usually find is something called the method or the methodology. Sometimes it's called the study. But it's basically a description of how the researchers did their work. So for example, if they conducted something like an experiment, then it will describe in detail how the experiment was done. So that's the second part, called the methodology, and it helps you know how they did their work. And then usually after the method or the methodology, you'll find a section that might be called the findings, the results, the data analysis. It will have some sort of title about that. And this is basically just a description, a very detailed description usually of the researcher's data. It'll show you when they did their research, it gives you the specific information that they learned. And often in this findings section, they'll include a lot of charts and tables and numbers and graphs. So if you look over here, this kind of light yellow section where you see like a table with lots of data and some math, that's the kind of thing you might see in the findings or the data analysis section. After the data analysis, you often see a section called discussion. And the discussion is useful because it usually tells you what the data means. So in the data analysis section, they just give you the data in detail. They give you all the numbers and all the information that they learned. And then in the discussion section, they try to interpret that data and tell you what that means, especially what it means for like their topic, their research question, what they're trying to discover. And the final section is usually called the conclusion, and it basically just kind of briefly states what the researchers learned. It'll often kind of summarize their findings in a short paragraph. And then the other thing that you'll often see in a conclusion is they will probably talk about, what future researchers should continue to study about the topic. So that's generally the conclusion. And then at the very end, what you'll find is a section called references, right here in light blue. And the references is simply a list of all of the sources that this professor or this researcher read before he or she did their own study. And so references comes at the very end. And if you want to find more sources of reading, the references can be really helpful. So that's the basic structure of an academic article. But this is the thing, I'll be honest, academic articles are not easy to read. They are difficult to read They're usually written by professors and scientists, researchers, medical doctors, and they're written for their peers, meaning other professors, other doctors, other scientists who are in their own field. So it's not always easy to read an academic journal article and really feel like you fully understand what they're saying. So for the purposes of your research project, I have some tips to think about what to read and what to skip. You don't need to spend, you should spend a lot of time reading your academic articles, but you don't need to spend hours and hours and hours and hours trying to understand every detail and every section of the article. My advice, so I have advice for what I think you should read and what you maybe could skip, especially if you're spending a lot of time with the article. So the thing that you definitely should read, you should definitely read the abstract at the beginning. It's a summary of the article, and so it'll give you the general idea of what the article is about. And it'll also generally tell you, how the scientists, how the researchers did their work and what they learned. So all the most important information will probably be found in the abstract. However, you definitely should read it, but you shouldn't only read the abstract. You should continue to read more. It's really helpful to read the method or the methodology section because that'll give you a really clear idea of what the researchers, how they did their research. Did they conduct an experiment? Did they do a survey? Did they review like literature and learn to learn more about the subject? So that's a really helpful part to read. What I will say about the method and the methodology is it's important to read it and it's important to get a basic idea of how the researchers did their work, but you still you probably don't have to have a really detailed understanding of exactly how they did their work. As long as you can kind of just get the gist of the method. Did they conduct an experiment? Did they do a survey? Did they work with people? If so, who did they talk to? What kind of questions did they ask them? If you can answer some basic ideas about their methodology, then that's fine. You don't have to have a really detailed understanding. The next section that's important is the discussion, because as I said, the discussion can tell you, it'll give you in some detail what they learned from doing their study. And so by reading the discussion section, you will have a really kind of clear and detailed idea of what they learned and what their data means. The other section that can be really helpful is the conclusion, because again, with the conclusion, they're going to repeat in probably like a really basic and simple way what they learned. And the conclusions are usually short, so it's not that much of a problem to try to read a conclusion. So those are the parts that you should definitely read. The parts that you could maybe skip, you don't have to skip them, but if you feel like you don't, if you feel like it's taking you a long time and if you feel like this is a really difficult article for you to understand, these are the parts that you could skip to save yourself time. So you could skip probably most of the introduction and literature review. I will say that, the literature review will often get into a lot of detail about the background of this topic and tell you a lot more about what has been learned before this research article. It can be helpful, like if you're reading a research paper that is that's like about your major and about like what you want to focus on in your studies, especially if it's something you want to continue to focus on beyond just this research project, then actually it's a good idea to read the literature review, because it'll give you a really good idea of what is already known about the topic. But if this is a topic that you're mostly just studying for this one research project, you could probably skip most of the literature review and introduction. You might kind of, you might skim it a little bit and look for like important ideas, important vocabulary, but you probably don't have to read it very carefully. Another part that you could probably skip is the findings, results, the data analysis section. This section is going to, like I said, it's going to have a lot of math, it's going to have a lot of charts and graphs, it's going to have a lot of data, and oftentimes it tends to be really complex and difficult to understand. Especially if if you don't understand the math that the researchers are using, if you don't have a lot of knowledge about like how to do statistical analysis, then the chances are you won't understand this section anyway. And the good news is that when you get to the discussion section, they will explain all of this. And so you can usually skip the data analysis and just go straight to the discussion, and that will tell you what the researchers learned from their data anyway. And then the last section is the references. The references is simply a list of the researchers' sources, and so there's no need to read it. You could, if you could look through it. If the most useful thing usually is if you're continuing to look for more sources for your own research project, sometimes it does help to look through the references and see if they have a source that might be helpful for you. But otherwise, the references is not really meant to be read the way other sections are meant to be read. So that's some advice about what you could read carefully and what you could maybe skip if you're trying to be more efficient with your time in your reading. And the most important thing, I think, for a research project like this, one of the most, I think really from the academic journal articles, instead of having a really detailed understanding of every section of the article and everything the researchers did and everything that they learned and all of the background in their literature review, what I mostly just want is for you guys to be able to get the gist of this academic journal article. You basically need to be able to answer two questions after you read your article. What did the researchers do? And what did the researchers learn? And so by reading the methods section, you'll be able to learn about what the researchers did. As I said, it'll give a description of either how they conducted their experiment, how they did their survey, or whatever it is they did to gather their data. And then the next part, and then what did they learn? So if you look at the discussion and the conclusion, that'll show you what the researchers learned. And that's really the most important thing that's going to come out of this article, because that's the information that we really want and we really need. What did these researchers learn about their topic that was new that they wanted to share? So basically, as long as you can answer those two questions, that is all I need from reading an academic journal article. That's kind of the minimum, most basic thing that you would need for a research project like this. So just read to get the gist, and read to try to learn what did the researchers do, and what did they learn.